I want to start off by thanking Dr. Lipton, my advisor here at BU, for from the beginning of freshman year helping me organize my thoughts on this awesome project. I also worked with Dr. Keshev and Dr. Bolo at Beth Israel Deaconess and Boris Biermacher in Pennsylvania to make these studies. So I'm going to start off with talking about bipolar disorder and schizophrenia in general, which is what my topic is. So this image here is Vincent van Gogh, and it's not him, it's a painting by him about 2 months before his suicide. And this really represents to me what bipolar disorder and schizophrenia means. It's really the middle ground between the two heart-wrenching and just destroying sorts of disorders. So Van Gogh is said to have suffered from schizophrenia by some and bipolar from the other. So this really highlights the fact that the field really doesn't have a great way of distinguishing between the two in some cases. So raise your hand. Do you personally know someone with bipolar disorder? Okay. Schizophrenia? Okay, interesting. The stats go that it should be 2 times as many people have bipolar disorder than schizophrenia. So it seemed like it was about 3-to-1 ratio here. So that kind of says a little bit. So bipolar disorder is defined here in my presentation as a, mood disorder characterized by mania and depression and euthymia in the middle. Also, psychosis can be a feature. That's why there's some people with diagnosis with bipolar with psychosis. Schizophrenia, on the other hand, is a psychotic disorder and can have aspects of a mood component. This seems a little bit fishy to me just based off of this, like a necessity in one and a possibility in the other, and possibility in one, necessity in the other. Either way, the field really has come to the hypothesis that they aren't different things in themselves, that it's really a continuum. Some people can have more of a psychotic feature and more of a mood feature. Either way, they're really just 2 ends of one long spectrum. And this is supported by the fact that there are genetic overlaps between the two. So background to my project itself is early diagnosis is extraordinarily important for both conditions. People with schizophrenia who are treated early have much better long-term outcome. Their symptoms aren't as bad, and they can function in society like a lot better. Bipolar disorder as well, however, this is a little bit problematic because diagnosing bipolar itself is difficult. On average, somebody who is diagnosed with bipolar disorder reports that they began experiencing symptoms that they can say that that's associated with this condition. They began experiencing those 10 years before their diagnosis. So this raises a ton of questions. People aren't getting the right treatment at the right times. Now, that's a lot of suffering, 10 years. They could be living a less suffering-filled life. Also, pediatric diagnosis, the rate has fluctuated. 40-fold increase in the early 2000s of kids being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which is appalling. The question is, well, were 40 times the children suffering from this and not being diagnosed in the first place, or were there a lot of kids getting antipsychotics that didn't need to? We don't have an answer to what happened there, but the fact that there's a question is appalling. So, in addition, both are extremely heritable. If you have somebody in your family, first-degree relative, with either condition, you have a 10 times higher likelihood of getting that condition than somebody who's not related to a person with that condition. So that's a pretty hefty stat right there. For the rest of my presentation, I'll be saying HRSC to mean high risk for schizophrenia, and the same for bipolar. All this means is you have, or the person in this study has one first-degree relative with whichever disorder is being referred to here. So my project is broken up into 2 studies. The first is comparisons of subcortical structures, indentations, swellings of these balls of neurons underneath the cortex. And cortex is kind of the higher order thinking, the cognitive synthesis place. Really, it's a abstract thought and whatnot. Whereas the subcortical structures process information on a bit more basic of a level. And then we're going to correlate those scores, or we're going to correlate functioning scores with these physical changes. My second study is analyzing kids at high risk for bipolar disorder compared to those at high risk for schizophrenia and seeing what disorders they're more likely to have and if these likelihoods are different between the two. So these are the balls of neurons beneath the cortex, and of the regions we analyzed, the right hippocampus and the right amygdala were different. And I didn't know these words until I took neuroscience courses. So for boiling down for people, amygdala controls really the social emotional processes, and we're seeing that in schizophrenia. It's kind of a known thing in schizophrenia that social emotional processes are at a deficit, and it's interesting that these regions also have indentations, actually seems like chunks taken out of these regions that support these functions. Hippocampus, it regards memory. It controls different memory processes, and we're seeing an indentation in these regions too, in the high risk for schizophrenia people compared to those that are healthy controls. So we correlated these indents, the degree in which a chunk was basically taken out, and the people who have more of a chunk taken out have more problems with attention and working memory. So we're seeing that it relates to functioning, these structural changes that we're seeing. And what's just appalling to me is these people aren't diagnosed with schizophrenia. They are just related to somebody who has schizophrenia. So we're thinking the genetic risk that the person has because their first-degree relative has it is really influencing this, or the environment. That we haven't really controlled for at the moment, but it is interesting. So when we compared what disorders people at high risk for both disorders have, there are no difference across all these 9 categories that we compared. However, if you can see, 25% of each group, about more than 25%, have ADHD, which is higher than the general rate in the population. And additionally, 65% of those with high risk for bipolar disorder had at least one disorder, whereas 48% for the high risk for schizophrenia. That is much higher than the 13 to 21.4% in a group of general population that were in the same age range. So we're seeing that these kids are definitely more at risk for mental illness, but they're at risk in similar ways, meaning the proportions across these disorders are skewed in such a way that they're even. This actually supports the fact that the two disorders themselves are similar. So this can be added to the list of similarities. The genetic risk, the fact that those who are at risk have similar disorders itself, and also the fact that schizophrenia itself has a physiological difference that correlates with functioning is extremely interesting. What we can take away from this whole thing is that these at-risk groups have problems functioning, they have physical differences. So maybe treatment should be focused on these high-risk groups. Right now, as far as I know, there aren't any real programs for people who just have a first-degree relative with these. But if they are functioning differently, maybe some cognitive therapy, maybe some processes to deal with memory and functioning could be prophylactically administered to these people, and maybe in the long term they can have increased functioning in the general populace. So I want to say thank you to the 2 teams in Boston and in Pittsburgh who have helped me do this study. So thanks. All right, question time. Ben Coleman.
Hi, Kathryn, good presentation.
Thank you.
What tasks did you use for the attention and verbal stuff specifically, is my first question. Secondly,
Yes.
Although there wasn't a significant difference in the different disorders
Yes.
between the 2 high-risk groups, there certainly were trends. What was
Yes.
your end for each person? And do you think that if you had more, there may have been some significant differences?
Okay, first question, continuous performance task, the verbal section. So that was like A, B, C, D, X. Say yes when you hear 2 X's in a row. And for your second question, you mean N per person or N for groups? Group size, we had 135 for the bipolar group and 89 for the schizophrenia group. Yeah, and the trend, sorry, 1 second. The trending, a trending group difference was anxiety. Yeah, anxiety. If you can see here that the graphs, anxiety looks pretty big there. But once we Bonferroni corrected, that significance level went to a trend, and it just, I didn't want to mention a trend.
Yeah, just
Yeah, gotcha. Maya.
Sorry for being enthusiastic. So it's clear that you're proposing this topic that's actually been proposed in the literature too, of this like clinical high-risk group having these cognitive, symptoms that create a syndrome.
Yes.
I was curious if you did any research about what is being implemented sort of prophylactically for these groups, and whether or not that's something that you think is feasible given the fact that you have results, but it's not 100% robust, I guess.
For schizophrenia itself, yes, there are definitely programs that are starting to do this. They're looking at kids who have a prodrome, though, so they are experiencing symptoms that are above just the norm. So it's not just like, oh, you have a memory problem. It's like you have significant perceptual aberrations that are definitely abnormal, but are not schizophrenia itself. So there are group therapies that are enhancing cognition for that, but as far as just plain and simple first-degree relative with one of these things, not that I've seen. The only research for bipolar disorder that the research group that would be doing a prophylactic sort of thing would be the one in which I got this bipolar research data from itself, but it would be trials, I guess. Nothing that I know hard fact is going on. Good question, though. Thank you. Josh.
Hi, really good job.
Thank you.
I was just curious about what the age ranges were for both the children and the adolescents specifically.
Okay, so I had two, it's children, okay. I had two studies, so I'm gonna make it really quick. The first one, the average age was 16, but it ranged from 10 to 25 for the subcortical shape. For the frequency analysis, it ranged from 6 to 18, with the average being 11 in the bipolar group and 14 in the schizophrenia group. I have to do further analysis to determine if this age difference is making an impact.
Thank you.
Don't mind. Okay, cool. Wait, one more question really quick? Yes.
Okay, I was really interested, I don't know if you can say anything about this data-wise or just opinion-wise, pharmacologically, when you intervene with these kind of like at-risk groups, people who are starting to show symptoms with first-degree relatives, if you know anything about that, I think that's like an interesting point to study, as like medicating someone who's young with one of these conditions is very different than medicating someone who's older. I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you have any data on it or anything like that.
I don't. From my experience in the literature, I mean, I think it depends on what condition you're medicating for, and even within conditions, different medications can be used. I definitely wouldn't be a proponent of medicating kids who are at risk just because they are at risk for something. Definitely if they're fully diagnosed with something and need it.
Broad question.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. Yes. Cool. Thank you.